The birth of Earth and the Moon. 4.5 billion years ago, before there were oceans, forests, or skies, the solar system was nothing but a swirling cloud of dust and gas. From this chaos, our sun ignited, and around it, leftover fragments of rock and ice began colliding, fusing and forming planets. Among them was a small, unstable, molten sphere that would one day become our home, Earth. In its infancy, Earth was a violent and alien world. Asteroids bombarded its surface daily, releasing enough heat to keep the crust molten. Volcanoes erupted endlessly, pouring lava across the land and filling the atmosphere with choking gases like carbon dioxide, methane, and sulfur. There was no air to breathe, no oceans to calm the surface, and no life to cling to this fiery rock. Earth was young, chaotic, and unforgiving. Then came an event that forever changed its destiny. About 4.5 billion years ago, a planet-sized body known as Theia struck Earth in a cataclysmic collision. The force of this impact was unimaginable. It melted vast portions of Earth's surface and hurled enormous amounts of molten rock into space. Out of this fiery debris, gravity sculpted a new companion, the Moon. This single event stabilized Earth's tilt, slowed its rotation, and created tides that would one day play a crucial role in the development of life. Without the Moon, Earth as we know it may never have existed. In the aftermath of this collision, Earth was still molten, a glowing sphere covered in oceans of magma. Slowly, the planet began to cool. The crust hardened and water vapor trapped in the atmosphere condensed into clouds. Then, for thousands of years, it rained without end. Torrents of water fell from the skies, filling basins, valleys, and lowlands until the first oceans were born. What had been a world of fire transformed into a world of water. Water is not just a liquid. It is the medium of possibility. In these primeval oceans, chemistry began to dance. Lightning struck the surface. Ultraviolet radiation from the young sun poured into the seas, and volcanic vents pumped minerals and heat into the depths. These forces created a primordial soup rich with molecules, the building blocks of life. Somewhere in this turbulent mix, a spark occurred. Simple molecules combined into complex chains, and the first self-replicating structures were formed. This was the beginning of biology. But in these earliest days, the environment was still harsh. The sun blazed more fiercely than it does today, and without an ozone layer, ultraviolet radiation streamed down unchecked. Asteroids continued to collide with Earth, sometimes boiling away entire oceans in flashes of heat. Yet, despite these repeated cataclysms, life clung to existence. It adapted, hid in deep-sea hydrothermal vents, and endured long enough to become more than chemistry. By 3.8 billion years ago, the first true cells appeared. They were tiny, fragile, and alone, but they carried the spark of survival. Fossil evidence of ancient microbial mats, known as stromatolites, tells us that life had already taken hold in shallow seas. These organisms built layered structures, leaving behind stone monuments that still stand in parts of Australia today. They are silent witnesses to life's earliest triumph. The atmosphere remained toxic, filled with methane and carbon dioxide. Yet these early microbes thrived, harvesting energy from heat and minerals. They were not complex, not visible to the naked eye, but they represented the first chapter of life's story. From the chaos of dust and fire, from the fury of impacts and endless storms, Earth had transformed into something extraordinary. It was no longer just a planet, it was a living world. The birth of Earth was not gentle. It was sculpted by fire, violence, and destruction. But it was through this destruction that creation became possible. The collision with Theia gave us the Moon, which still guides our tides. The endless rains gave us oceans, the cradle of all life. And the unstable, hostile conditions forced life to adapt from the very beginning, forging resilience into its very foundation. When we look at the night sky and see the moon, we are seeing a scar from Earth's violent past, a reminder of the cosmic accident that made life here possible. Every wave on every shore, every breath of air, and every drop of rain is a continuation of that ancient story. The Earth was born in fire, shaped by impact, and softened by water. And from those beginnings, the stage was set for the greatest story ever told. The story of life. Life's first spark and the oxygen revolution. After Earth cooled and the first oceans formed, a transformation unlike any before was underway. Chemistry had already begun weaving its delicate patterns in the oceans, and somewhere in that mix of minerals, lightning, and heat, the first living cells emerged. These early microbes were tiny, fragile, and primitive, but they marked the beginning of biology on Earth. For the first time, matter wasn't just existing. It was alive, replicating, and evolving. Life in those earliest days was built on simplicity. Cells fed on chemicals released from volcanic vents, in darkness far beneath the surface. Others absorbed energy from the sun through primitive chemical reactions. These were the first survivors, clinging to existence in an unstable and dangerous world. They had no eyes, no organs, no nervous systems. Only the basic machinery needed to grow, divide, and pass on their structures. Yet even in their simplicity, they carried the potential for everything to come. For over 1 billion years, life remained microscopic. Oceans were filled not with fish or plants, but with mats of bacteria and other single-celled organisms. If you had traveled back in time to look at Earth, you would see barren rocky continents and endless seas. But hidden within those waters, invisible to the naked eye, were the first ecosystems. These microbial worlds were thriving, experimenting with new ways of surviving, and slowly changing the planet itself. One group of microbes developed a revolutionary skill: photosynthesis. Around 3 billion years ago, cyanobacteria began capturing sunlight and using it to convert carbon dioxide and water into energy. The byproduct of this process was something no life had ever encountered in large amounts before: oxygen. To us, oxygen is life. To ancient organisms, it was poison. The arrival of oxygen marked Earth's first global crisis. For billions of years, life had evolved in an oxygen-free world, using chemical reactions that collapsed in its presence. As cyanobacteria multiplied, oxygen began flooding the oceans and leaking into the atmosphere. This event, called the Great Oxidation, nearly destroyed life as it existed. Countless species were wiped out, unable to adapt to this new toxic gas. But catastrophe for some meant opportunity for others. Oxygen, though deadly to early life, carried incredible potential. It was a high-energy molecule that could power more complex forms of metabolism. Those microbes that learned to use oxygen gained an evolutionary advantage. From this crisis, new pathways for life opened, setting the stage for greater complexity. The Great Oxidation also reshaped the planet itself. Iron dissolved in the oceans reacted with oxygen, falling out of the water, and forming massive deposits of banded iron rock that we still mine today. The skies, once orange and hazy with methane, turned blue as oxygen filled the air. The protective ozone layer formed, shielding the surface from the sun's harmful ultraviolet rays. Earth was transforming from a toxic alien world into something that looked far more like the planet we know today. Yet the transition was brutal. For millions of years, oxygen levels rose and fell, plunging life into cycles of extinction and survival. During one of these oxygen surges, around 2.4 billion years ago, Earth plunged into its first Snowball Earth event. Global temperatures collapsed, and ice spread across nearly the entire surface. The planet became a frozen sphere, seas covered by miles of ice, sunlight blocked from reaching the water below. It seemed as though life might end almost as soon as it had begun. But deep in the oceans, where hydrothermal vents released heat and chemicals, life endured. These refugees allowed microbes to survive through the Ice Age, waiting for the climate to shift again. When volcanic activity eventually pumped greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, Earth warmed, the ice melted, and the oceans flowed freely once more. Life had survived its first global extinction, scarred but not erased. In the wake of this catastrophe, ecosystems began to stabilize. Oxygen levels continued to rise, supporting greater metabolic efficiency. Cells evolved new structures, including nuclei to house DNA and internal compartments to manage energy. These were the first eukaryotes, the ancestors of all plants, animals, and fungi. With them came the possibility of complexity far beyond anything seen before. For nearly 2 billion years, life remained mostly microscopic, but it was no longer simple. Single cells began cooperating, forming colonies that laid the groundwork for multicellular organisms. Evolution was experimenting, building new blueprints that would eventually lead to plants, animals, and every living thing we see around us today. The story of early life is one of paradox. Oxygen nearly destroyed the planet's biosphere, but it also opened the door to complexity. Global ice ages threatened to freeze life out of existence, yet they also tested its resilience, ensuring that only the hardiest survived. Every catastrophe was also a crucible, forging new opportunities. When we breathe in oxygen today, we are drawing on the legacy of cyanobacteria, tiny organisms that reshaped the entire world billions of years ago. They turned poison into power, catastrophe into creation, and in doing so, they built the foundation for everything that followed. From them came forests and oceans teeming with fish, reptiles and mammals, and eventually, us. Life's first spark was fragile, but it was persistent. It endured asteroid impacts, volcanic fury, poisonous skies, and frozen seas. And every time it was threatened with extinction, it found a way forward. This resilience would become the defining trait of Earth's biosphere, guiding life through every trial still to come.
Supercontinents and Snowball Earth by 2 billion years ago. Life on Earth was no longer just fragile single cells drifting aimlessly. Oxygen was reshaping the world, cells were growing more complex, and evolution was slowly preparing the way for multicellular life. But Earth itself was also changing. The restless movement of tectonic plates, the great slabs of rock floating on the mantle, was sculpting the surface into new shapes. Continents collided, mountains rose, and vast landmasses fused together into supercontinents that would dominate entire eras. One of the earliest of these giant landmasses was called Nuna, sometimes known as Columbia. It formed around 1.8 billion years ago, bringing together many of Earth's first continental fragments. Later, around 1.1 billion years ago, another supercontinent emerged, Rodinia. These colossal landmasses reshaped climate, ocean currents, and life itself. When continents fuse, they create arid interiors far from oceans, deserts stretching for thousands of miles. When they break apart, they form new coastlines, shallow seas, and environments ripe for biological expansion. Rodinia's assembly was one of the most significant geological events in Earth's early history. It stretched across much of the globe, with barren landscapes, volcanic ranges, and vast interior deserts. But even as Rodinia rose, forces beneath the crust were already working to tear it apart. Continental drift is relentless, driven by the heat deep within the planet. Over hundreds of millions of years, Rodinia fractured, splitting into smaller continents that drifted into new configurations. This continental shifting triggered one of the most dramatic climate events in Earth's history: global glaciation, also known as Snowball Earth. Around 720 million years ago, glaciers spread from the poles toward the equator. Ice advanced across continents, covering mountains and plains. Oceans froze from the surface downward, trapping life beneath thick sheets of ice. From space, Earth would have looked like a giant white sphere, reflecting sunlight and locking the planet into a deep freeze. For millions of years, Earth remained frozen. Sunlight bounced off the icy surface, preventing warming. The oceans, choked with ice, were deprived of circulation and ecosystems collapsed. It seemed as though Earth had reached its end, entombed in ice. But life refused to vanish. In the dark depths of the oceans, near volcanic vents, microbes survived, drawing energy from the planet's heat, in thin meltwater layers beneath the ice. Photosynthetic organisms clung to survival, capturing whatever light filtered through. Life was pushed to its limits, but it endured. The very processes that caused Snowball Earth eventually brought it to an end. Volcanoes continued to erupt, releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Over millions of years, these gases built up, trapping heat and gradually melting the global ice. When the thaw finally came, it was sudden and dramatic. Glaciers retreated, oceans surged, and climates shifted in violent swings. The meltdown released floods of nutrients into the seas, fueling an explosion of biological growth. This cycle of catastrophe and recovery set the stage for one of the most extraordinary events in evolution. After surviving Snowball Earth, life began experimenting with new forms. Multicellular organisms, which had already appeared in small numbers, started to thrive. By around 600 million years ago, strange new creatures emerged in the seas. They were soft-bodied, alien in appearance, unlike anything alive today. This period, known as the Ediacaran, gave rise to the first ecosystems of large, complex life. These early multicellular organisms included disc-shaped forms, frond-like structures anchored to the seafloor, and quilted creatures resembling leaves or pillows. They had no eyes, no bones, and no shells, but they represented a new level of complexity. For the first time, ecosystems contained visible life. The breakup of Rodinia and the warming after Snowball Earth provided the conditions for this leap. Shallow seas spread across the continents, rich in oxygen and nutrients. Diversity increased and evolutionary pathways expanded within a few tens of millions of years. Earth was preparing for an even greater transformation when nearly all major animal groups would appear. The story of supercontinents and Snowball Earth is a reminder of how intimately life is tied to geology and climate. The movements of continents created deserts, coastlines, and seas that shaped where life could thrive. Global ice ages nearly ended everything but forced life to adapt in ways that made greater complexity possible. Every geological upheaval, every climatic catastrophe pushed life to new limits and opened new opportunities. When we look back, it's easy to see only the dangers, the ice that nearly suffocated the oceans, the barren supercontinents that limited growth. But it was these very hardships that built resilience. Without Redinia's rise and fall, without the frozen grip of Snowball Earth, the stage may never have been set for complex animals to evolve. Earth's history is not a story of smooth progress. It is a story of cycles of assembly and breakup, freezing and thawing, extinction and survival. Each cycle left the survivors stronger, more diverse, and more prepared for what came next. By enduring the cold grip of global ice, life had earned the right to expand. The Cambrian explosion was coming, and with it, the dawn of visible life.
Explosion of life, Pangaea, and the Great Dying. Around 541 million years ago, the quiet microbial seas of Earth transformed in an evolutionary burst unlike anything before. This period, known as the Cambrian explosion, marked the dawn of visible life. For billions of years, life had been microscopic, hidden to the naked eye. Now, suddenly, oceans teemed with creatures of astonishing variety, shape, and behavior. Evolution accelerated, experimenting with new designs that would define the animal kingdom. Trilobites, armored arthropods with segmented bodies and compound eyes, scuttled across the seafloor in vast numbers. Their fossils, preserved worldwide, are symbols of this age. Predators like Anomalocaris, with grasping appendages and circular toothed mouths, hunted smaller organisms with speed and precision. Shells, skeletons, and defensive spines appeared for the first time, sparking an evolutionary arms race between predator and prey. For the first time in history, ecosystems were complex, filled with hunters, grazers, scavengers, and filter feeders. Life was no longer confined to invisibility. It had exploded into diversity. Corals began building reefs, stabilizing marine ecosystems. Early chordates, distant ancestors of vertebrates, wriggled through the water. Each innovation opened a new path, a new opportunity. By the end of the Cambrian, most of the major animal groups we recognize today, arthropods, mollusks, chordates, and more, had already emerged. Over the next hundreds of millions of years, life pushed into new frontiers. Plants colonized land, greening the continents and transforming the atmosphere with oxygen. Insects followed, buzzing through forests of ferns and towering lycophytes. Amphibians crawled from rivers onto land, their limbs supporting their weight as they explored swamps and floodplains. By the late Devonian, about 360 million years ago, reptiles appeared, laying hard-shelled eggs that freed them from dependence on water. With this innovation, vertebrates were no longer tied to rivers and lakes. They could conquer dry land. The Carboniferous period was a world of giants. Dragonflies with wingspans over 2 feet soared through oxygen-rich skies. Millipede-like arthropods as long as cars crawled across forest floors. Lush tropical swamps dominated the landscape. their dense vegetation capturing carbon and laying down the coal beds we mine today. Reptiles diversified, adapting to deserts, forests, and wetlands. Each new niche brought new evolutionary experiments. Meanwhile, the continents were drifting once again. Around 335 million years ago, tectonic forces brought nearly all land together into one colossal supercontinent, Pangaea. This vast landmass stretched from pole to pole, surrounded by a global ocean called Panthalassa. From space, Earth looked divided into two realms, one immense continent and one immense ocean. Pangaea reshaped climate and ecosystems. Its interior, far from the moderating influence of the sea, was dominated by deserts. Seasonal extremes created harsh conditions. Along the coasts, however, swamps and forests thrived. Life adapted to these new environments, spreading across vast ranges. But the unification of continents also meant reduced shallow seas, cutting off many marine habitats. This change put stress on ocean ecosystems, setting the stage for instability. As the Permian period unfolded, reptiles diversified further. Some evolved into mammal-like reptiles, ancestors of future mammals. Others gave rise to lineages that would one day produce dinosaurs. Evolution was laying down blueprints for the future. But this progress was about to be shattered. Around 252 million years ago, Earth experienced the deadliest catastrophe in its history. The Permian-Triassic extinction, often called the Great Dying. Triggered by massive volcanic eruptions in Siberia, it unleashed unimaginable destruction. Lava flowed across millions of square miles, releasing vast amounts of carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. Greenhouse warming soared, oceans acidified, and oxygen levels plummeted. Marine life collapsed first. Coral reefs dissolved, trilobites disappeared forever, and over 90% of marine species vanished. On land, forests withered, insects were devastated, and nearly 70% of vertebrate species went extinct. The diversity that had taken hundreds of millions of years to build was nearly erased in less than 1,000,000 years. The Earth was scarred. Ecosystems were simplified, reduced to a handful of survivors. The biosphere had nearly collapsed. For millions of years afterward, recovery was slow and fragile. Yet life endured, clinging to existence through hardship as it always had. Among the survivors were small reptiles that would evolve into dinosaurs, and mammal-like reptiles that carried the seeds of our own lineage. The story of the Cambrian explosion and the Great Dying is a study in contrast. One marked the rapid flourishing of life, the other its near-total destruction. But both remind us of life's resilience. Diversity can bloom in bursts of creativity, but it can also be pruned in catastrophic collapse. Each event reshapes the path forward, clearing the stage for new players. Without the Cambrian explosion, animals as we know them would never have appeared. Without the Great Dying, dinosaurs might never have risen to dominance. Catastrophe and creation, destruction and renewal. This is Earth's rhythm, a cycle written in stone and fossil. Dinosaurs' reign and their extinction. Out of the ashes of the Great Dying, life slowly recovered. For millions of years, ecosystems were fragile, dominated by a few hardy survivors. But as stability returned, new forms began to emerge. Among them were reptiles that would grow into the most dominant creatures Earth had ever seen: the dinosaurs. The first dinosaurs appeared around 230 million years ago, small and relatively unremarkable compared to what would follow. Some were nimble predators, others were plant-eaters, but none yet approached the scale and diversity we associate with their name. Over the next 20 million years, however, evolution transformed them. By the Jurassic period, dinosaurs had risen to become rulers of the land, air and even parts of the sea. Sauropods, massive long-necked herbivores, towered above forests, grazing from treetops. Some stretched over 100 feet in length and weighed as much as small ships. Carnivores evolved alongside them, adapting to hunt or scavenge. Allosaurus and later Tyrannosaurus rex became apex predators, armed with bone-crushing jaws and razor-sharp teeth. Raptors, smaller but more intelligent, hunted in packs with deadly efficiency. The land was a stage of giants and hunters, each shaping the other in an endless evolutionary race. But dinosaurs were not the only success story of the Mesozoic era. In the skies, pterosaurs soared on wingspans larger than modern planes, masters of aerial hunting. In the seas, marine reptiles like ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs patrolled the waters, filling the oceans with predators as formidable as those on land. Ammonites, coiled relatives of squid, flourished, marking time in the fossil record with their diverse shells. Meanwhile, mammals were quietly present in the shadows. Descended from earlier reptile-like ancestors, they remained small, nocturnal, and overlooked during the reign of the dinosaurs. Yet their survival strategies, warm-blooded bodies, fur for insulation, and adaptable diets, would one day prove decisive. For now, they lived in burrows and underbrush, surviving under the feet of giants. The continents themselves were changing too. Pangaea, the great supercontinent, began to break apart during the Mesozoic. This continental drift reshaped climate and habitats, creating new coastlines, seas, and environments. As land masses separated, species were isolated, and evolution produced new, unique forms. The world was becoming more diverse, both in geography and in life. For nearly 170 million years, dinosaurs thrived. They adapted to deserts, forests, and swamps. They grew to unimaginable sizes and developed extraordinary defenses. Their dominance seemed eternal. Yet, like all empires, their reign would one day collapse in an instant. 66 million years ago, near the end of the Cretaceous period, disaster struck. The impact unleashed more energy than 1 billion nuclear bombs. In seconds, rock vaporized, fires ignited across continents, and tsunamis roared through the oceans. But the greatest damage came from what followed. Dust, soot, and debris were hurled into the atmosphere, blocking sunlight for months. Temperatures plummeted, photosynthesis collapsed, and food chains broke apart. Herbivores starved, predators followed, and ecosystems unraveled. 3 out of every 4 species on Earth perished. The age of dinosaurs was over. The extinction was brutal. Pterosaurs vanished, marine reptiles disappeared, ammonites died out, and nearly all dinosaurs perished. Only one lineage survived, the small, feathered dinosaurs we now know as birds. Alongside them, mammals endured, sheltered in burrows, surviving on seeds, insects, and carrion. The giants were gone, but the small and adaptable inherited the Earth. In the aftermath, ecosystems were empty and silent. Forests regrew, climates stabilized, and mammals began to expand into niches left vacant. No longer confined to the night, they grew larger, more diverse, and more ambitious. Within a few million years, they were spreading across continents, evolving into new forms that would dominate the next age. The story of the dinosaurs is both triumphant and tragic. They ruled for longer than humans have even existed, shaping ecosystems with unmatched diversity and size. They were the undisputed monarchs of the Mesozoic world, yet all it took was one asteroid, one random event in the vastness of space, to end their reign. Their extinction cleared the stage for the rise of mammals, and eventually, humanity. Every bird in the sky is a living dinosaur. a reminder that even in extinction, some legacies endure. When we study their fossils, we see not just the story of their rise and fall, but also the fragility of life. Power and dominance are no protection against catastrophe. The age of dinosaurs ended in fire and darkness, but it was also the beginning of something new. Out of the silence, evolution found its next actors. The giants were gone, but the world was far from empty. A new chapter was waiting to be written. Rise of mammals, humanity, and the future. When the asteroid fell and the age of dinosaurs ended, Earth entered a new chapter, the Cenozoic era, the age of mammals. For the first time in over 150 million years, the world was no longer ruled by towering reptiles, but by small, resilient survivors that had spent eons hiding in the shadows. Freed from competition with dinosaurs, mammals began to flourish, spreading across continents and evolving into astonishing forms. In the early Cenozoic, strange creatures roamed the recovering Earth. Giant, flightless birds, some over 10 feet tall, became apex predators before mammals grew into that role. Within a few million years, mammalian lineages diversified rapidly. Hoofed animals appeared, filling grasslands and forests. Primates evolved in the trees, their grasping hands and keen vision setting them apart. Rodents spread swiftly, becoming one of the most successful groups of animals on the planet. As time passed, the scale of mammals increased dramatically. Mammoths and mastodons, massive relatives of elephants, roamed in great herds across plains. Saber-toothed cats prowled with deadly fangs, hunting large herbivores. Whales, descended from land-dwelling ancestors, returned to the sea and became the new ocean giants, evolving into the largest animals ever to exist. From tiny shrews to colossal blue whales, mammals adapted to nearly every environment Earth offered. Meanwhile, Earth itself continued its restless changes. Continents drifted toward their modern positions, shaping climates and ecosystems. Mountains rose, seas shifted, and ice ages swept across the northern hemisphere. These glacial cycles tested life once again, forcing adaptation and migration. Yet each trial only deepened the resilience of the survivors. Among the most remarkable mammals were the primates. From small, tree-dwelling ancestors, they evolved greater intelligence, complex social behavior, and an ability to adapt to shifting environments. Around 6 million years ago, one lineage of primates in Africa began walking upright. These hominins freed their hands for tools, carrying, and eventually, creation. Over time, their brains grew larger, their societies more intricate. By 2 million years ago, species like Homo habilis and Homo erectus were shaping stone tools, mastering fire, and migrating beyond Africa. Fire was transformative. It provided warmth, protection, and the ability to cook food, unlocking new energy sources that fueled brain expansion. By around 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens, our species, had emerged. We were not the first humans, nor the only ones, but we were adaptable, cooperative, and endlessly curious. Within tens of thousands of years, we spread across the globe, from Africa to Europe, Asia, Australia, and the Americas. Along the way, we encountered and interbred with other human species like Neanderthals and Denisovans, carrying their legacy within our DNA. Humanity's rise was swift compared to Earth's long history. We developed language, art, and culture. We hunted in coordinated groups, built shelters, and began to shape our environments. The invention of agriculture about 10,000 years ago marked another turning point. Instead of moving with the seasons, we settled, planting crops and domesticating animals. Villages grew into cities, cities into civilizations. With agriculture came surpluses, trade, and writing. Empires rose and fell, knowledge expanded, and technology advanced. In just a fraction of geological time, humanity reshaped the planet. We diverted rivers, cut forests, mined mountains, and extracted fuels from ancient deposits of coal and oil, the remains of life from millions of years ago. But our rise came with consequences. Today, humans are the dominant force on Earth, altering ecosystems at a pace unmatched in history. We have warmed the climate by burning fossil fuels, disrupted habitats, and driven species to extinction. Some scientists warn we are entering a sixth mass extinction, this time caused not by asteroids or volcanoes, but by human activity. And yet, we also carry something no species before us has possessed: awareness. We can study Earth's past, uncover the scars of extinctions, and see the patterns of survival. We are the first beings to look billions of years into the past and millions into the future. That perspective gives us both responsibility and opportunity. The legacy of Earth's story is one of resilience. From fire and ice, from poison skies and global floods, life has endured. Every extinction was also a beginning. Oxygen's poison became our breath. The Great Dying paved the way for dinosaurs. The asteroid cleared the stage for mammals and ultimately humans. Catastrophe is not the end. It is transformation. Now, humanity stands at a crossroads. We can choose to ignore the lessons of the past, risking our own downfall. Or we can embrace them, using our intelligence to preserve the world that shaped us. We are not separate from Earth's history. We are its latest chapter. Every tree we plant, every species we protect, every effort to sustain our climate becomes part of the story of survival. When we look at the stars, we see countless worlds forming, colliding, freezing, or burning. But only here, on this fragile blue planet, has life written such an epic. From stardust to microbes, from trilobites to dinosaurs, from mammoths to modern humans, the Earth has carried life through unimaginable trials. And though the future is uncertain, one truth endures: life will continue. The question is not whether Earth will survive, but whether we will remain part of its unfolding story.